Okay, we're going to just start here in just a second. We're waiting for all our attendees to join us here tonight, and we'll get started. I'm really happy and to welcome everybody here tonight for our fourth in a series of talking about when public schools reopen, and we're talking tonight with folks from Charlotte and Wake and Durham. So that's going to be a great conversation. And, you know, we want our schools to come back stronger and better. I have resisted using, and y'all can disagree with me later tonight, I don't like the term reimagine. We don't need to reimagine our schools. We have great educators and great leaders and great students, but we do need to come back stronger and to do the things we've been advocating for years. So I want to say my name is Yvonne Brannon. I am Chair of Public Schools First. I'm delighted to be here tonight. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Terrence Ruth. Terrence is also works with me at Public Schools First and with the Justice Love Foundation. And he also is professor of social work at NC State. So Terrence, I'm going to let you introduce our guest tonight, and then we'll get started.
Welcome everybody to the call. We have a wonderful panel tonight, and we'll start with introducing Christina Spears, who is working out of the Office of Equity Affairs, Wake County Public Schools. She is also a founding member of Wake Ed Partnership, Beginning Teacher Leadership Network. And she serves on the Wake Education Policy Council, Advisory Council, and serves on Public Schools Forum of North Carolina's Color of Education Guiding Committee. Also, who we have on the call is Justin Parmenter. He is a 7th grade language arts teacher with experience in Albania, Turkey, and Arizona before arriving to North Carolina in 2002. He is a finalist in Charlotte Mecklenburg, one of the finalists in Charlotte Mecklenburg in 2016 as Teacher of the Year. Also on the call, we have good friend Michele Burton, 25-year veteran educator, president of the Durham Association of Educators, and president of the NCAE Student Services Division. And finally, we have school board member for Wake County Public Schools, Christina Kushner, who is a professional policy analyst and freelance writer who has lived in Wake County since 1998. And she is a member of Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church and is a William Friday Fellow for Human Relations through the Willikers Leadership Initiative. Thank you everyone for coming on board. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
And I'm going to skip over my friend Terrence because I've already introduced him, and we're going to jump right into our conversation tonight. And before we get started in more detail talking about this summer and particularly this fall, I would like to ask our panelists to think about where we're at so far. We've been in this remote learning world for the last 2 months or more, and what's kind of been working, especially we've got somebody here from Wake, Charlotte, and Durham, so we have a little 3 different school systems represented tonight, some of the challenges, some of the concerns, and a lot of parents are asking me, and a lot of citizens who don't have children in the school system are really curious about what's going on and what's happening with social emotional learning during this crisis. So if y'all will just take some time and go around the square here and share your views, we'd appreciate it. Justin, you want to jump in? You're in the middle square there.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to be here with you all tonight talking about my favorite topic. So you said what's working well. I think, you know, there was such a steep learning curve for all of us with this, how quickly this happened and how unexpectedly this whole thing happened. Here in Charlotte, you know, particularly at the school that I work at, we were able to ensure that almost all of our kids have an internet signal in their home and have a device that they were able to take with them from school if they needed one. So I think initially the transition to that, you know, video conferencing style connection with the kids felt like it was working fairly well. Like initially it felt like a decent substitute. That was 2 months ago. And really as time has gone on, that has worn very thin. And for a lot of the kids, you know, it's real complicated when you throw in the idea of having grades or not having grades. And what I've noticed is, first of all, we really can't give grades if we can't guarantee that all of our students have access to an education right now. That to me is a no-brainer. But what I'm seeing is when the kids know that there is no grade, what we see is how this whole system that we built on extrinsic motivation and the belief that the grade is the ultimate goal, is that, excuse me, engagement becomes a huge problem. And so I have classes where, I have students, and some of them that I know that, they're available. They're just playing Call of Duty all day. And these are kids that, and that's not the case for all of them. There's a whole range of situations that my kids are in. But there are a lot of students that, when they're in my classroom, I'm able to motivate them through whatever tricks I've learned through getting to know them as an individual. And that could be physical proximity in the classroom. It could be, parent contact. I mean, whatever works with that kid. So many of those tricks don't work at all in this, this remote learning scenario. So I would say, we've definitely learned a lot of lessons, but one of the most important lessons I've learned is that this is a temporary fix. This is by no means going to be something that I agree with you. This is not something that's going to forever transform the way we envision how we teach our kids. Because for me, it's always going to come back to that human connection that the teacher, that bond that the teacher and the student are able to form, that enables the learning to occur.
So I guess I go next. So here in Durham County, I think one of the what really worked well is that when we found out on that Friday we weren't coming back, or that Thursday that we weren't coming back, the district level staff, school-based staff, they just got into gear about how do we continue learning for our students while they're at home. And people just began to start making homework packets. Teachers began to think about, okay, how do we do remote learning? That first week that we were out, that was designated as our spring break. So that was we used that entire week to plan how do we keep our kids learning while they're at home. And also we had a really great plan here in Durham to make sure our kids got fed, because as you know, food insecurity is a really, really serious problem for many of our students, our kids across the state of North Carolina. So that immediately got kicked into gear, how we're going to deliver food to our students, things like that. The biggest challenge with remote learning, and it has been a challenge like Justin said, is here in Durham, we didn't have enough devices for all our students. So presently, Durham County, we have 3 devices for every, 3 devices per student. And so we have about 34,000 students. So that means that our kids couldn't take computers home with them. And many of our students here in Durham do not have access to technology at their homes. May it be a computer or it may be Wi-Fi, what have you. So that came up immediately, that a lot of our kids were not going to be able to participate in remote learning. And I sat on panels with city council members, county commissioners talking about this issue. One of the things we found out is about 4,000 students, 4,000 homes in Durham do not have access to Wi-Fi. Many of our kids are sharing computers with family members. There may be one laptop in the house and it has to be shared with 5 people. Or you just have the cell phone. It's really not conducive for doing schoolwork. And so that was a major, major, major issue. And what I hear from my colleagues, because I'm a school library media coordinator, but from my regular classroom teacher friends, that only 50% of their kids would log on daily. I even heard it as low as 30%. So that goes back to equity, making sure when our kids come back in the fall that we have the devices, the technology, the Wi-Fi, the hotspots in order to make sure they are successful academically. And also with social emotional learning needs, I'm hearing of many of our parents who have lost their job during this COVID-19. As a matter of fact, one school here in Durham raised $40,000 because so many of the families at that school, their parents have lost their jobs. So yeah.
Christine, you want to share some of the things that going on over at Wake County?
Did you say Christina or Christine? I'm happy
Either
to.
one of you. You're both Wake County, so just jump
Yeah.
in.
I
got-
want Christina Christina's been talking to teachers. I want her to go on first.
Okay.
I can do that. Thanks, Christine. And I think you and I make a good team. It's good to be here tonight with everyone. I think remote learning, what's been working is I think humans, like people are putting in work, like teachers for sure. Like we built a system over a weekend, right? Put things into place for their students to make sure that some sort of learning could happen, right? I think that's really administrators, central service folks, like everyone has put in serious work to create some sort of, like Justin said, emergency temporary learning for our students, right? But just like Michele said, a challenge is getting in touch with all of our students, making sure they have access to devices, access to Wi-Fi, and just access to good learning materials as well. Some equity concerns, mention access to technology. One thing Wake County did really, really well is making sure our students' basic needs were met first. The food distribution was set up quickly and in an efficient way, getting materials to students, whether technical materials, digital materials, or paper materials. All of that stuff was really well done. My team in the Office of Equity Affairs, we've talked a lot about, Justin mentioned grading, mastery of content, what that looks like preparing for next year. We believe even if students don't have a device or maybe even haven't gotten in touch with a teacher as much as we would like them to, that students, families, our communities have funds of knowledge. They have things, systems, experiences in their homes where our students are learning, and how can our teachers and educators connect to those experiences that our families are having, right? We've talked about, if you go on a nature walk, you can do science, we can do art and bring back some artifacts and create a thing. We can write a story about it. We can share why we do that as a family, right? We can hit lots of standards, but how do teachers tap into that and make sure when we get back to schools and get back in our buildings and get that learning, that really learning, that we build on what students have been doing, even if we haven't seen them on Google Classroom. One more challenge that I'll touch on, and I'll pass it to Christine, around social emotional learning, is just everyone's exhausted. All the humans who are involved in this, like speaking for myself, I as an adult am exhausted being on Zoom all day during a global pandemic, not to mention, just the systems of white supremacy and capitalism and poverty and all the other things that are kind of amplified right now. It's weighing on adults. So I'm wondering, how are we going to care for the adults that will have to care for our children, are already caring for our children? Teachers are parents, lots of teachers are parents that are struggling as well. So I'm hoping we keep the needs of educators and their social emotional learning first, so that they can hopefully support our students and their families.
Good point.
Yes, excellent point. And I think to everyone's point about remote learning and some of the how hard our educators are working right now, I think the main reason remote learning is working at all is because of the relationships that our teachers, our educators had with our students to start with. We could not be doing remote learning without that strong foundation. And so that when we talk about reopening schools in the fall, I think that's going to be our great challenge, because how are we going to do that with kindergartners coming in for the first time? Those kindergarten teachers are telling me I need to see those babies when they're coming in. So, and how are all of our teachers going to establish relationships with their new classes? So I think that's the huge challenge that we are facing, and many of the directives are going to be coming from the state legislature, as well as the governor's guidelines, as well as sensible public health guidelines that we need to be following. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the reopening of schools. And that when I'm talking to parents and others in the community, that's the main message I am giving them, is there is still so much uncertainty about student enrollment. Like you said, Dr. Brannon, some parents think we should just roll it out as we normally do. Other parents do not want to come back to school until there's a vaccine or a treatment for COVID. Others want to just stay away until there is just more certainty. And I just don't know when that will be coming down.
Well, that kind of moves us into our next slide, which is really, so here we are now. We have gotten, the General Assembly is in town. They have passed a CARES Act from the federal level. We have that money. Our state legislature has given some money, some package. So let's talk a little bit about funding, because a lot of things that are going to have to happen when schools reopen center around some of the funding issues that are going on and some of the new state laws that have already been put in place and some that they're working on right now. There's a whole bunch of bills out there at the General Assembly. I wonder if anybody wants to share anything with our audience about funding and how you are thinking of using it in your area, and just anything you want to talk about in terms of legislative policies that are underway right now. I put a few of my concerns out there, and I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, I can talk about the CARES Act here in Durham County. I know that DPS, Durham Public Schools, we're going to receive about $11.5 million from the federal government. And like I was talking to you all previously about the technology needs that we have, some of that money is going to be used to make sure we are one-to-one. Right now, Durham has about 15,000 devices. So that money will help us to get the rest of the devices that we need to make sure if we go out again, that we can send devices home with our students. And also they have Wi-Fi hotspots if they need those things, need one. The biggest thing, state funding and local funding, as you all know, that we're going to have a major decrease in our sales tax, and it's going to affect every county in this state. As you all may know, May 1st, when we had the march in Raleigh in 2019, we had 5 demands about, increasing the number of social workers, school psychologists, school guidance counselors, school librarians, raising teacher pay 5%, expanding Medicaid, okay? And in retrospect, I wish it was done, because no one could have ever imagined this devastating virus wreaking havoc on us. But it's going to take a toll. Here in Durham, I know that our superintendent and the school board asked for $17 million this year. And we thought we were going to get it, right? But then the pandemic happened, and Durham County is going to see a decrease in sales tax. They thought they were going to get like $15 million in February. That was the projection. Now they're looking at only $200,000. So we're like, okay, what are we going to do? We have these needs, particularly, and this is probably going on in Charlotte and Wake County. We are getting an increase in students ESL and EC populations. And we're not getting the money from the state, but those populations are growing. And last year, this past school year, 2019-2020, DPS had to dip into their fund balance to pay for the increase in EC students. And so that's in the budget asked for our county commissioners, and the likelihood of we getting it is very, very small. And we have to educate those kids, and the money has to come from somewhere. They're going to keep coming to us. So yeah, it's something that we have to keep pushing our legislators to do this for us, for our state, and for our students.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, what's going on in Charlotte? Are you similar situation?
Yeah, and I know one thing I wanted to mention, I'm sure you all are probably facing in your communities too, is that I think we're a little worried about what enrollment is going to look like in the fall. and how our funding is tied to those head counts. And you know, with all the economic uncertainty and unemployment just skyrocketing right now, and not only that, but also parents who may opt for safety reasons to not want to send their kids to school in the fall. It's really hard for us to know how many kids we're going to have. And so I think, you know, I don't know whether there's any political will for some sort of a hold harmless provision on student enrollment in the fall, but it certainly would be nice to have some flexibility there and some understanding that, you know, our numbers are going to be a little crazy, I think, until this whole thing, you know, until we're out of the woods with this virus.
I think
I
that's
would
a very
agree.
good point.
Here in Wake County,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around enrollment in the fall. We certainly see that in Wake County as well.
Well, I think I'm so glad you mentioned that, Justin, because one of the things we like to do at the very end is talk a little bit about things we can do as citizens to advocate for our schools. And you've already given us a number one on our list is to push for some hold harmless rules, at least for this coming year. So what about county commissioners in your areas? County commissioners have also got some of this CARES Act money. Are you guys going after some of that money locally, and what do you think that looks like?
You know, on our local budget, we've been a little bit more focused on, as far as, you know, the sort of other advocates and I have been more focused on trying to push for an hourly raise for our non-certified staff. And so I don't have a lot of answers for you on CARES money in Mecklenburg County.
Okay, Christine.
I'll say that you know, we're pushing for our hourly employees. We have bus drivers raised to $15 an hour last year, which really helped a lot with staffing there. But you know, we've got a lot of I think we have 3,100 employees in CMS that are making less than $15 an hour. And you know, considering the disinfecting and cleaning protocols we're probably going to be facing in the fall, it doesn't really make sense to be underpaying custodians at a time when we have, you know, we have a shortage of custodians. So how are you going to fill those positions? And we're probably going to need to hire more just to be able to get all that work done. I mean, they're already overworked. So yeah, so I'm not the guy to talk about CARES funding, unfortunately.
Well, Christine, I know that Wake County is very, very active in this CARES money from the county.
Yes, we are working, our superintendent's meeting with our county manager, and the commission just had a meeting yesterday talking about our main budget. But for the CARES money, there's just a lot of restrictions and timing of when we can use that money. So I think we are still trying to figure out some of the federal strings that come with that funding. And I think it's not as clear as we would like it right now, but it can't replace lost revenue from our child nutrition services, as an example. And I know just like in Charlotte, Meck, and in Durham, our CNS folks are working overtime to serve meals. We've served more than 1 million meals since the beginning of the crisis. So we're really, they are working harder than ever, as our bus drivers, to deliver meals, to deliver devices and materials to students. So we need to focus on keeping our staff well supported. And certainly the CARES money can help with that, but it does have some restrictions. And it has a deadline of when some of it we have to use by the end of this fiscal year, this calendar year, and some we can hold on to for a while. But we're working with our county leaders.
And you know, I don't think that the general public knows a lot of these details. There is CARES money that's going directly to school systems. There is some CARES money that will go directly to DPI. There's CARES money that will go to counties, and many counties are giving some of their CARES money to the school systems in their county. But as Christine said, one of the things that people are constantly asking us about, and the more we get into it, the less we know, is all of the different restrictions that Christine mentioned and the timing of getting all these things done. And we're just about 10 weeks away from starting this all over again. So one thing I did put on here that I hope we can talk about for 1 second, or at least mention to our audience who'll be watching this tonight, and we are recording it, so hopefully folks who missed it can watch it tomorrow too, is that the requirement that all kids have to be in school the first week of school. And also the requirement that the General Assembly passed when they were in town the last time, that we can only have 5 days of remote learning. So some people are saying this is great. We just need to rip that Band-Aid off and everybody come into school for that first week and let's get going. Other people feel that there should be flexibility allowed to different school systems and to phase their kids in, maybe bring in the younger kids staggered in days, and maybe bring in middle schools a little differently and high schools a little differently. So I wonder if any of you have any comments on this, or, you know, you're in the classroom, Justin and Michele and Christine, you're sitting on that school board, and Christina, you're talking with all the staff, and what are your thoughts about this?
Well, you know, what occurs to me is that nobody in the General Assembly has any idea what we're going to be facing in mid to late August. I mean, we've been doing this for 2 months now. 2 months ago, none of us had any idea we'd be here right now doing this. So, you know, I find it a little bit troubling that we're not approaching this with more flexibility in mind. I don't know how anybody thinks that it's a good idea to just plan to have all our kids in school for the, you know, for the first week of school, already be planning. I mean, I think it's, hopefully that can happen. Based on what I'm seeing on the news, it doesn't seem real likely, but I really think we need to be approaching this whole situation with the spirit of understanding and flexibility, and also just making sure that, you know, that our #1 priority is the health and safety of our students and staff. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I think that might be a little optimistic.
And you know, this
Yeah.
is one of the sore spots, right? The sore spot has been for many years now. The General Assembly took away calendar control at the local level. The local level, the elected school board members like Christine in the past were able to set their calendar and establish their calendar and do it what was best for the community, what was best for their student populations, what was best for individual schools. And that was taken away, as you know. And it seems like if it's ever a time when we want to do what you said, you know, show grace and kindness and flexibility, Justin, that this would be the time to do it. Because one of the things that I did see that we have a couple bills being introduced that's trying to talk a little bit about some of these things that we need. And one of the conversations that was held this week at the General Assembly was about the policy on absence. If, you know, some kids are going to, you know, stay out more often, perhaps, if they're worried about being sick, or the parent thinks that someone else in the school is sick. So what are we going to do about truancy and absentees and this kind of stuff? Again, it seems like we need some local flexibility to see what's going to really work. So I'm going to let you off the hook on that, my pet peeve there, and move us on to talking a little bit more about reopening our schools. And what, you know, with the positive attitude that we are reopening in August in some fashion, you know, what do we need to do to get our staff ready? And what do we need to do to get our buildings and our buses? You know, what are y'all thinking about this from your seat in this mess? And how do we handle all of these issues? So anyone can jump in on any of these things, but I really want us to share with the public some of your thoughtfulness that you've had about this. You've been doing this for 2.5 months. What do y'all think we need to be doing?
Well, I can tell you I'm on the district level committee for reentry. It has about 50 people on it, several principals and administrators. And for some reason, I got chosen to be mass gatherings. So we have to figure out how the beginning of the school year is going to look like. And when we found out that April 17th, that everybody had to be in the school, we were like, oh my goodness. So one of the things we talked about, just PPE, like how are we going to supply masks? How much is that going to cost? Who do we give the mask to? Are we going to buy the mask for the students? How much hand sanitizer are we going to buy? Do we need to buy gloves? I mean, all these things just began to come out, and the cost that it's involved to protect our staff and our students. With buses, thinking about, okay, if we bring kids to school, we can't have them sitting with each other. They have to sit apart. So how will that affect the timing of them getting to school? In a county like Durham, even though it's not really geographically big, but still that would take a lot of effort. The sanitizing of the buses. So when we start talking about those things, we said, you know what, we're going to come back on next Monday and we're going to figure this out, because it was just so overwhelming to us to do this monumental task, to think about all these different things.
Mhm.
Well, I'm very concerned about staff development too, and getting, you know, Christina, you were talking about teachers are exhausted already, and, you know, teachers are very concerned about what they're facing. How do we get teachers and the rest of our school personnel ready, and what should we be talking about doing?
I think the biggest thing is Wake NCAE held a bunch of district meetings last week, and we're going to hold some more next week. Is one thing that one teacher said and really resonated with me was, I just want to teach. I don't want to have to worry about my own survival, much less the survival of my students and their families, you know, and that's it. Like, we shouldn't have to go into unhealthy, unsafe schools. We should not have to teach in them, and our students should not have to learn in them. Like, I'll just say that, period, point blank, right? I think the concern of at least Wake teachers that I've talked to as far as staff development is, what are the safety protocols going to be, the sanitizing protocols? Am I responsible for that? Is that all up to custodial staff? We don't think it should be. It should be a community effort. Like, what are parents responsible for? If procedures are broken, what does that mean? Like, we don't want to police folks' behavior in a pandemic, but you can't send your kid to school sick. I, as a teacher, can't come to school sick. You know, do I get a different kind of sick leave, or do I have to use up my sick leave for 14 days if I have to quarantine? Like, how do parents pick up kids? We don't want sick kids on buses or waiting in wellness rooms. And like, teachers are just concerned about the health and safety of any person in the school community right now. And I think that has to be really the first and foremost thing that we figure out for our folks, for sure.
Can I ask a sub question, Christina? I know your department is rolling out some amazing research around access to rigorous courses for particular students. How have your rollout of certain programs around equity been impacted by COVID-19?
That's a great question. Our office has really been focused on supporting the district in whatever way possible in the different, like, kind of objectives or outcomes that we really need in this moment. As far as direct support to schools and what that means, it's been a lot of coaching and just, how can I help you? What resources do you need? And communicating that back to central service so that can be a part of that conversation. And I think as far as staff development in the fall, whatever the fall looks like, the focus is going to be on, like I said, those procedures and how can equity be a lens on all of the procedures and all of the programs and all of the systems. But we're small, and we also know that we're one of the only few districts in the whole state that has a team like us to be able to do that. So we really need everyone to put on their equity glasses and look at all of the systems with an equity lens.
Thank you.
If that answers your question.
Well, you know, when you said that, Christina, you made me think about the fact that we were on a call the other night, and the gentleman was saying, you know, we're going to have lunch or breakfast and lunch in our classrooms. Who's going to clean it up? We need to wipe down the devices a couple times a day, because they're, you know, now all the calculators and the notebooks and everything are in the classroom. yeah, who's going to do that? How are we going to be, how are we going to be instructing and being the janitor and the health monitor and so forth in the classroom? So, Justin, you're sitting there with a bunch of 7th graders.
Right.
How's your day going to go when, and maybe the kids don't change classes anymore?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, because I was just thinking, even just something as simple as, okay, if the kids are leaving my class and going to math class, who is there to supervise them in the hallway and make sure that they're, marching in single file 6 feet away from each other? Because that's not how 7th graders roll in the hallway at all. And we don't have the staff. I mean, does anybody really think that all of a sudden we're going to magically have all this funding to hire, hallway monitors? At a time when the legislature is already talking about budget cuts. We could really use some of that tax revenue we've lost over the last few years right now, I can tell you that. But one of the other things also, I think when you talk about staff development is, as much as I may not want my teaching to look like this, I think, there is going to be some remote learning where kids are at home and we're expected to do the best that we can to engage them in the learning process while they're not in the classroom. And for some teachers, that's second nature and they're doing a lot with digital learning already. For others of us, we're a little more old school and we could use, I think we've learned a lot over the last 2 months, but it's been, it's sort of been building the plane as you're flying it. And I think now that we have the summer, and we know that this is what we're going to be doing probably at least some in the fall, we can maybe be a little bit more intentional about supporting teachers and professional development and helping them to learn some tricks and tools that will help them to try to make that online learning more engaging for students, if that's something that we're going to have to be doing.
Christine, you're sitting on the school board, you're looking at that CARES money. Is there a possibility of using some of that CARES money for paying teachers to participate in staff development in July, or to pay for some of the training, some of the resources they need? Will you be able to use that money that way?
I think that's a great question, and I need to follow up to make sure that we have that option. I think we've talked a lot about it being used for devices, like Michele was saying in Durham, and the technology that we need, because I think it's not realistic to think we're only going to have 5 remote learning days. I think we're going to, with the uncertainty, one thing that, as Justin was talking about, 7th graders going in a hallway, I talked to a parent who has a child at the elementary, middle school, and high school level, and he's saying seeing that as a 3 times the risk for his family, where he would rather think about, do we open all our schools K-12 for smaller geographic populations to isolate people from going to 3 different places? Now that kind of blows my mind. But I think there's a lot of, and again, going back to the uncertainty, how do you get middle schoolers and high schoolers to be able to change classes and socially distance? And I think it's maybe a little easier at the elementary school level, but how do you then offer a comprehensive middle and high school experience without congregating those students in different levels of learning, whether it's in the classroom or an extracurricular? How do we reintroduce athletics? I think that's a key emotional and social event for students. How do we get that back in gear? Maybe we do baseball in the fall, which is less contact than football, and football's in the spring. I don't know. There's so many different permutations on social distancing in a school. I think we have our leadership looking at plans A, B, C, and D. And we really need thoughtful decisions and flexibility from the state and federal level so that we can truly serve our students, because elementary looks different than middle, looks different than high school, looks different than exceptional children, on and on. And so we need that flexibility, and we need the funding, as all of your friends here have said. We need more adults in the building so that we can protect our educators and our students.
Mm-hmm.
So Justin, you're in a middle school.
That point you were making about, it looks different for elementary and middle and high school. I've got a 2nd grader and a 4th grader, and it's been really interesting watching them through this process. My 4th grade daughter is pretty independent. My second grade son, I'll just say he has a very low threshold for frustration. And so I'll typically sit next to him and try to help him on his math. And I'm trying to, grade assignments on my computer next to him at the same time. But, for kids like him, he's 8 years old. And I mean, for first graders, students who are starting kindergarten in the fall, they have a completely different set of needs. And those are the kids that I really feel for. They rely so much on that personal, in-person, one-on-one relationship with the teacher to just spark their curiosity and their interest and their motivation to buy into this, learning process. It's just so important for them that I think maybe prioritizing, in some cases, prioritizing that for them. I have a colleague in Western North Carolina who talked about a possible plan that they have to have 612 do remote learning and then open up some of those middle and high school facilities to be able to spread out elementary kids in those buildings so that they can, deliver that in-person learning experience for those early elementary kids. So there's going to be a lot of outside the box solutions, I think, that are necessary until we're past this thing.
Right, I think it's going to be.
Terrence, your son is in the fifth. I'm sorry, Christine. Terrence, your son is in kindergarten, first year. So he got three-fourths of the way through it, and then he had to come home. So to Justin's point, how has he been dealing with the lack of having his classmates and his teacher?
Well, for my experience, which is similar to Justin's, my son, he loves the engagement of class interaction just as much as he enjoys learning. And so even if we create the most fascinating lesson, the absence of community is just as detrimental that we're finding out. And so the teacher, he has an amazing teacher who puts the class on virtual, and you see kids running around giving you a tour of their house, but the hard part for that teacher is how do you pull out rich instructional time with all these students on, and so we're seeing what was mentioned earlier in the conversation, the difficulty of having this sort of learning environment for an extended period of time.
Well, and Justin, I want to pick on you for a second because you're in a middle school, and we're talking about. I actually see middle school as very hard too, but we have some possibilities. I mean, some people have been suggesting that kids stay in the classroom and the teachers rotate, so that they can reduce, as Christine said, the number of exposing the kids to so many people in the hallways. They come in, they go to their class, they stay in their classroom, and the teachers rotate. I don't know if that makes any sense that would work, but that would get harder, Christine, right, in high school, where you have 2,100 kids in a high school. I can see that there it would get, you have a lot of electives. Christine mentioned athletics. A lot of people have been complaining about band. They want, kids, music, the arts. So it's really scary. And have any of y'all talked about or had any conversations with your school boards or your parents about busing, getting kids to school? Have any of y'all talked about that? Have any anything to share or any suggestions for parents?
Our assistant superintendent yesterday said it scares him to think about what we need to do in transportation. So that was jarring. He's scared. I mean, we've talked about double routes. I think someone mentioned that, having to have fewer kids and have short routes that the buses are going to have to be doing. Again, really overworking our bus drivers is one possibility.
Well, what's interesting, and I'm going to move us to the next topic, but just listening to all of you talk about some of the things you're tossing around as what you might do in the classroom, rotating teachers, classes, double shifts on buses, how you might spread kids out in the cafeteria and the auditorium. I'm hearing that you're left to be flexible with these awful solutions, but you don't have any flexibility in how you spend your money and how you schedule your calendar. And how you when you have to be there. So it seems to me like if parents and people are listening tonight, this is something you can be talking to your elected officials about. You know, it's like with one hand, we've been given a huge amount of responsibilities. How are you going to get the kids to school, Christine? Christina, how are you going to deal with all the social emotional issues when the kids get there? You know, Justin, you know, in your school, and then with your own children, Terrence and Justin. But on the other hand, we have so many things that are still being controlled by the General Assembly. So that seems a little unfair. So while we're talking about that, the thing that most people have been asking about, and I hear a lot of teachers talking about is, and Christine, I've heard you say this many times, we have got to have more people in the building. How can we monitor health and those kind of things, and what are we going to do about the physical health and then the mental health? So anything y'all want to share here with your experience and your advice? The public is very interested in these two issues. Who's going to be in the school to help our kids?
Well, I think that's where county commissioners need to help our schools, and the state absolutely, most certainly needs to increase this constitutionally required funding that they have for our schools. The CARES money is a non-recurring stream of one-time funding that's supposed to help us get through this crisis. If we're talking about adding people to our staff, to having the social emotional support, the counselors, the social workers that we need, the educators that we need in our buildings, it's going to need to come from the state, making it a priority, and from our county commissioners helping us.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Being on these committees with principals, I'm like, my goodness, there's not enough staff in the building to do all the things that we need to do to help kids be successful, and all the emotional trauma that they have gone through with this pandemic. And we don't have the school psychologists or social workers to support them. You know, and this is something I always talk to county commissioners here in Durham about this, and that we just don't have enough. And we have to figure out a way, especially those folks in Raleigh, how can we pay for these positions, because our kids need them. I just don't understand how we do it with the limited staff that we have. It really boggles me, and especially for the past 2 weeks being on these committees with principals and the pressures that are put on them to make sure that things keep running smoothly in their buildings. So.
Yeah.
Also connected to that, Michele, is the space. If you have to quarantine or have space that is set aside, I don't know how you find that in some schools, space to just set aside for this particular reason. And so just with staffing shortages, space itself seems like it would be something that's a little challenging as well. Sorry, Jess.
No, you're right.
On the staffing piece, you know, we already knew those ratios were at crisis levels before this thing happened. But I'm just thinking about the issues that our kids are going to be bringing with them when they come back. You know, for so many of them, school is their safe place, and it's the place where they get some, you know, they're able to come and get all kinds of needs met, and they've been now, you know, for the last 2 months, and we don't know how many more months this is going to continue. They've been without that support network, and a lot of them, you know, in difficult circumstances of various kinds. And I think that the needs that they're going to be carrying with them when they come back are going to be a lot more pronounced than they already were before. So we're already behind the 8 ball on those numbers, and you know, we're going to need this thing where we have a nurse who's, you know, rotating between 4 schools a week. You know, that's not going to work anymore. And the policy that they used to have in my school, it's something like, I think it was the 3 Bs, like don't send them to the office unless they're bleeding, barfing, and something else. I can't remember what the third one was. We can't do that anymore. If somebody coughs, we're going to have to take it seriously. And so it's going to take staff to be able to help. And, you know, like Terrence said, it's going to take space to be able to, you know, just to knowing that this virus is running rampant right now, to just ensure that we're not, our schools aren't turning into petri dishes. So I don't know where that funding's going to come from, but we're going to need it.
Christina, right now, when you look at the schools in Wake County and the things that they're doing, what are social workers typically spending a lot of their time doing and at a school, even though we know they're understaffed? Like I have a friend who's a social worker in Wake County. She has 2 schools. She has an elementary and a middle school. She has 2,200 kids. But what are they normally doing, the social workers in Wake County?
What I've heard now that social workers are doing is really just trying to get in touch with kids and make sure kids have what they need, those basic needs as far as food, making sure they have those materials, making sure they're able to get in touch with a teacher and a teacher can get in touch with their family. Social workers are doing a lot of what teachers can't, because teachers are planning lessons and remote learning and office hours and holding IEP meetings if you're a special ed teacher, right? Or doing specialized plans if you're ESL or intervention, or social workers are doing, and counselors even at the middle school and high school level are picking up a lot of what teachers and administrators can't.
And you know, I know that when I visited one of the schools in Wake County and met with a social worker, this was in January before all this happened. Terrence, you were with me. I can't remember which school we were at. But one of the things that we heard them say, the social worker saying, this is pre-pandemic, was we can only do critical triage. We are doing suicide alerts and people who've been thrown out of their homes. And the parents call and say, my kid, you know, we're on the street, or we're in a shelter, or we don't have a way to get our kids to school. And so they were spending all their time doing triage. And I just want us to think for a second what they'll be doing in August. Because right now I see that in Guilford County, they're starting to evict people. We've had some rules across the state that said you can't evict people in June. What do you think is going to happen in July? Even if we push it through there with some CARES money, what's going to happen in August? So your thoughts when we think about these ratios, and we know, I think these figures are a little high. I don't quite trust them, because I don't see these ratios in Wake County, and I don't know where else they'd be. But these are, you know, these are state provided numbers, so we'll go with them. But I don't see this in Wake County. Christine, do we have one social worker for every school?
No, we don't. And we have one nurse for every 2 schools. I know I remember that. I mean, the counselors look about right, but and school psychologists that really serve the students with very significant needs, we have a shortage of, and that needs to come from state funding. We've been asking our commissioners simply don't have the funding stream to provide this level of social emotional support to our students. And it's been pointed out tonight, our educators and the adults in the building are going to need social emotional supports as well when we all get back together in August, because it's been a very traumatic and continues to be a traumatic event.
Well, Michele, maybe this is you mentioned. Go ahead, Michele.
Yeah, I was going to add something to that. Here in Durham, DAE, we got a couple of years ago, community schools grant from the NEA to have some schools become community schools, where we could do wraparound services for kids and get those extra supports in the building for them, because so many of our school social workers, school psychologists, school nurse, you know, we just don't have enough. And so the community school coordinator, what they would do, their purpose is to figure out, okay, what are some of the things that this particular school needs? How can we be a support where we can get these resources? And I know that with 2 of the community schools that we have in Durham, the 2 community schools coordinators, they have done major fundraising drives. Lakewood, I believe they raised close to $40,000 to help with the students whose families are facing eviction. They lost their jobs, they don't have what they need. just create this fund just for the people at the students and families at Lakewood. And then I believe Club Boulevard, which is our other community school, I think they raised about $30,000, a big chunk of money. But anyway, but again, you have to find the money to hire the community schools coordinators, and the two community school coordinators at Lakewood and Club, we were able to get extra funding from the county commissioners, the Durham County commissioners, to help fund those two positions. And they're paid through Durham Public Schools, so that money goes through Durham Public Schools. But how do you get that at all the schools that need a community school coordinator?
Well, Michele, you've just touched on two things. I was going to take you back to earlier in the conversation when I heard you say that you literally were raising money for people at a school that the parents had lost their jobs. And I've had in the last couple of weeks, teachers and social workers and counselors email me and say their husbands or their wives lost their jobs. So they're not only dealing with all the trauma of their own students right now, many of our professionals have, lost a second income in their home. And a lot of them have the family members who moved in with them who've lost jobs. So I do think, to all of your points and to those people who are listening, that we're not just now talking about our kids and what they're bringing back, but we are also talking about our school personnel and what they're bringing back in their experience on this as well. Most of us by now know someone who either has COVID or someone who has died of COVID. And that's, it's really going to be astounding. So I want to take your attention to this. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see that the CDC finally, about a week ago, or maybe a little bit longer, Michele, I'm not sure, but they coughed up this guideline, these decision trees that schools should be making before they open a school. Terrence and I were looking at this last week, and we were going, I don't know how you get out of column 1. How do you get to column 2 and 3? But I've taken these questions in column 1 and I've put them on a slide by themselves so that our audience can see them, and you guys can make any comments you want about these. I got, will reopening be consistent with state laws? Yes. That seemed like it'd be an easy check. What about the next two?
Yeah, Yvonne, one thing that really stood out to me on that, I just pulled up a bigger one because my eyes can't see that well anymore. In the middle section where it says encourage social distancing through increased spacing, small groups, and limited mixing between groups, if feasible. Those two words really stood out for me. And my concern is that we're going to have policies that are put into place which are flexible or which depend on our ability to implement those policies instead of what we know to be best practices based on science and based on the recommendations of infectious disease experts. So I don't want someone to give me a policy and say, here, do this if it works for you. I want someone to give me a policy and say, here's what you need to do in order to not die when you come to work and to make sure that your kids are going to be able to go home healthy to their families. So those words really stood out to me, and not in a good way.
Well, and this one about training to, I think Christina or Michele, somebody mentioned we need to train. Our staff want training on how to even take care of their health and the safety of their kids. And then the last column, and I'll take us back to the big one. I mean, look at all the policy work. Christine, you're on the school board, and I'm picking on you about that. I mean, look at all of these policies. Do you get the privilege of making these decisions, or are we waiting on the General Assembly for these decisions? Who gets to decide the procedures for checking kids? And what do we do about, Christina, you said something about, do I use my sick days? Do I get paid if I get COVID? The school systems that you all belong to are pretty good about communicating, but then how about leave policies? And so I think you can see pretty quickly, I hope that our our public will get a chance to look at this decision tree as they're advocating for our student safety and our educator safety. These are hard to get through column 1, 2, and 3 to the open and monitor, in my view. And this is what is
Especially with,
considered conservative.
and especially with a virus that isn't always symptomatic or has delays and is symptomatic. And when Christina was talking earlier about teachers, what if they're exposed and they self-quarantine and then they get exposed and they don't contract the virus, or they test negative, which has a high, the tests are high, false negatives. And what if they have to quarantine again for 2 weeks? So there's just again, I said at the beginning, and my head still says there's so much uncertainty. Things are so fluid, and I think they're going to continue to be in flux from now until August, from now until the end of the calendar year.
So Terrence, you've worked a lot with young men in middle school age yourself. You've worked in alternative schools. You've worked in regular classroom settings. Parents are asking me, how am I going to get my 14-year-old son to wear a mask?
The part that's even difficult, even before you get to that question, Yvonne, is there's a shortage of masks and sanitizer for hospitals. Before you even get to a school, how do you equip whole school districts with the amount of mask and hand sanitizer? Just at the start of that question. But also, let's just talk about getting to school. I rode on the bus with the bus driver. There's no space on the bus to even check off the first column. And then the bus shortages in terms of bus drivers. How do you respond or have a plan B when bus drivers are sick? And so it's a really tough demand to hold to these 3 requirements just to operate just normal everyday school function.
Well, and Christine, when you sitting on that school board, are you looking to the General Assembly right now? I mean, they're in town for what, another month maybe? I've heard they're going to try to leave at the end of June, maybe the first week in July. What kind of communication are y'all getting from the General Assembly about how to deal with some of these policy issues?
Well, to be honest with you, I've been surprised at how little movement we have from our legislative leaders on this crisis. I trust the judgment of our HHS secretary. I think Mandy Cohen's done a very good job communicating. Our governor and the gentleman who's head of our public service and public safety have been doing a very good job communicating, but the funding, and we have a large rainy day fund that the legislature controls. I've been actually just surprised by how little movement there is to truly take some leadership for our state and to help folks make decisions, be decisive. We really need our legislative leaders to come together, work with our executives who are making, are communicating well and making good decisions and have responsibility for the executive branch. They need to come together and come up with a much better plan for the state.
Well, I do want to take 1 second to talk for a second before we do questions with our audience next in a few minutes. A lot of parents on the webinar tonight and have been on the other webinars that Terrence and I have been doing. And, parents are also worried about what they should be doing this summer, what they can do when school starts. Do y'all know, are parents even going to be allowed in the school building? A lot of parents are asking me that. Can they come in and volunteer to help in the classroom with the monitoring or the cleaning? Have any of y'all been in conversations about what role parents can play to help in this?
Yvonne, that's something, like I said earlier, being on this district-wide committee, I don't even think we gotten to that point yet. We're just kind of trying to figure out how do we get through this enormous task of opening schools and thinking about, yeah, parents want to come, they want to come in the building, they want to volunteer, they want to go to their child's class. Like, how do they help with this monumental task? You know, and it's, you know, it's daunting. It's kind of scary to think that we wouldn't let parents come into the building. So yeah, that's something that we have to think about in order to keep as many of our folks safe.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking when you think about, that traditional kindergarten. I work in a K-8 school, so I teach 7th grade, but I also get to see the little guys walking around all the time. And it's heartbreaking to think about those parents not having the opportunity, like Terrence probably had this school year at the beginning of the year, to walk your child to class for the first time, and cry all the way back to your car type of thing, just those routines that are being disrupted by this virus. It's really heartbreaking. But, I know from the protocols that I'm seeing for the end of the school year, in terms of dropping the Chromebooks back off and that type of thing, it seems like there's a lot of caution in terms of, don't get out of your car, we come and get it from you. And I just think that that's kind of going to be the reality for quite a while, is that there just really are a lot of restrictions on mingling and movement in any case where they're not absolutely, I hate to say necessary, because it's necessary to walk your kid to kindergarten on the first day of class. But, it's just, I think we really have to err on the side of caution.
Well, Christine, on your school board, make sure you figure out a way, they manage graduation. Maybe they can figure out a way to let parents walk their kid to the classroom, because Justin's got me teared up over here, remembering taking my 3 their first day as well.
Well, and I do think this crisis has shown us the critical role our public schools play, the lives of our community, and the lives of our families, and the lives of our kids. We are the foundation to our democracy and our community, and that just can't be understated, because I think this crisis has also exposed inequities in our societies, and there's so much work to do. We need to get to it.
I'm going to start taking questions, but I have one more thing for Christina. Christina, I love the work you do in Wake County. I've gotten to watch that in the Office of Equity. But, what's worrying Christina from her professional hat right now, looking over outside the window of the Office of Equity? What's the thing that's worrying you the most right now in terms of the inequities that you see or you're worried about when school starts back?
Oh gosh, Yvonne, where do I even start? I think just after hearing what Justin just said about dropping off the kindergartner is the social emotional piece of people. Like, our team has, like I said, we've done a lot of coaching. We've had a lot of conversations with people. We're doing like a social media campaign just to say, we see you. We honor the work you're doing. Like, we're in this together. We're going to figure this out together. Like, that has been the biggest thing, because there are so many inequities. Like, we knew these things before COVID-19. Some of us saw them, let me say that, and knew there were inequities and injustices. Now it feels like we all see it. It feels insurmountable. But I think going back to your question about parents and guardians part of reopening schools, I think they need to be in spaces with educators, and we have to figure this out together. I know in Wake NCAE, our next round of district meetings will involve area superintendents and our school board members, but then the round after that will include parents and PTA, because we had a couple parents join the first round, and they're on fire, and they're talking to their teachers about how to support their students' home environment. And like, I would want to talk to a parent about, how can we get you to walk your kindergartner in? Or I taught 6th and 9th grade. They walk their students in too for those big transition years, So I just think parents and educators need to be in the same space with decision makers, because we're all taking care of all the things right now. So we're going to have to build all the things when it's time to reopen schools.
Yeah, you're right. We like to see the lockers and where the cafeteria is and all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So we're going to go ahead and leave some time now. I want to kind of turn our attention to some of the questions. Terrence, have you been able to catch a few of those?
Yeah, we were able to answer some of them. One individual asked about social emotional learning, and how are we going to meet the social emotional needs of the staff. I know we want to focus on students and parents, but for the staff themselves, what are we doing to address the social emotional needs of the teachers and staff?
What are we doing, or what could we be doing?
Either one. It was sort of open,
Yeah.
so either one will work.
I mean, I really think it's one of those things, just like we were talking about before, where it was already something we weren't doing very well before, but now we're going to need it even more than we used to. I work with our district's trauma-informed learning initiative, and at the very beginning of that conversation about, how are we going to be able to transform the culture of this school district in this direction, we were talking about, okay, so if we wanted to build something in for staff, where we're emphasizing self-care for staff, which department would we go to partner with? And it took a while for us to figure that out, because really it just isn't a thing. I mean, that's not really unfortunately, with how little funding we have and how we've directed our priorities. Self-care for staff and social emotional health of staff has traditionally been, I think, more of a like what we do if there's a crisis. We've got like, here's what we do if you're struggling with addiction or something like that. There really isn't an emphasis on how we take care of ourselves on a daily basis. And if that's one change that comes out as a result of this, I think that's going to be fantastic for our school staff.
Here's a question that the parents asking. It says, what if a teacher gets COVID or somebody in a classroom gets COVID? Will the whole class be quarantined? Will the school have to be quarantined? Have y'all been getting any guidance from the health department?
Those are great questions, and I think that we can't answer them, but we will be working very closely with our public health officials, both at the county level and the state level, and following those guidelines.
It says here, I can't quite, they're concerned about what's going to happen. Do you have any thoughts about what might happen with electives in middle school? Will you have to concentrate on reading and math because of the loss in the spring? And as professionals or teachers, your thoughts on, should we be focusing on math and reading in the fall and not worried about all these electives?
Michele might have an opinion about that.
Yeah. I feel that we have to figure out a way to offer electives to students, because, if we just make it all about reading and math, that doesn't really, in my opinion, teach the whole child. But I'm going to be honest with you, after my discussion on the committee that I'm on for opening schools here in Durham, it's going to be a challenge with this social distancing. How can we do chorus? How can you do band? Because you are close to each other. How can kids go to the media center? That's what I do. But we have to figure out a way to offer those things to our students in this time of COVID. And so it's in our hands to figure it out and make it happen.
I think one thing I've been noticing too is how much of the way that people are coping with this crisis has raised the importance of the humanities. And so I hope that those, just like with the development of these Instagram battles, and just with, I know me personally, like how much I'm actually reading now, which I never had time to do before, like pleasure reading or reading books that I've always wanted to have time to read. And I think that, I just really hope that we don't prioritize certain subjects over others just because we think that we need to make up some kind of lost ground, when everybody in the world is in the same boat right And I think, also if it comes down to a funding issue, our sort of knee jerk, and we fought this battle with class size chaos not that long ago, our knee jerk reaction is, well, who's expendable? It's arts and PE, and it's all these classes that aren't on our standardized tests. And I just really hope that we can see through this, how we've responded to this crisis, how important having a well-rounded education really is to the kind of students that we're able to turn out.
Any other questions you see from Terrence?
Yeah,
I'm trying to go through these.
There's a great question here about alternatives to in terms of space. Have y'all heard anything about public and private buildings like churches, et cetera, that would be used as alternatives classrooms or spaces for campuses in your conversations, which is, they said it's being done overseas, and are we hearing anything here?
That's a great question. I know we are looking and combing all of our buildings for space and how can we use our spaces differently. So I know we're doing that inventory across our 191 schools.
So here's somebody who says they are Angela Garganas from Professor School of Education at Burton College, and she's asking, public schools play an essential role for our students with practicums to complete and become student teachers, so forth. She said, are there any policies in place for that? Has anyone heard them talking about how we're going to use our student teachers or allow them to come and do their practicum so that they can be in the classroom? And is there any discussions with legislators or district leaders about that? I've never thought about that one.
Well, Yvonne, I just had this conversation with my sister-in-law yesterday. She's a professor of education at Fayetteville State, and the way she sounds like it's just full steam ahead. She's planning for one of her student teachers to come student teach here in Durham, and she was asking me about the school, but she said no one has said anything to them.
Okay, I know there have been some relaxations on CEUs and teacher license renewals and those kind of things. Does anybody have anything to share on that? I've heard about it, but I don't have any information for this person.
I would check the school board, the state school board, their minutes and stuff. They literally link everything you need to know about CEUs and licensure renewal. And as far as Wake, our HR has done a fantastic job of communicating that information to teachers, and giving grace as far as observations and getting those things done.
We've been successful in Mecklenburg at getting teachers digital learning credits for kind of self-directed professional development that they've had to do, whether that's learning how to use Canvas or different digital tools. What we all found is that all of a sudden we're doing like the most necessary and practical professional development we've had in a long time just to be able to survive in this new teaching environment. And so fortunately our district here put together a way for us to be able to, show evidence of mastery of different tools, and to be able to get, I think teachers have to have 2 digital learning credits per renewal cycle, which, can be hard to get depending on what you normally do. So it's been good to get that, to have all that hard work that we've done learning on our own to actually translate to something in terms of renewal credits.
So one person has a suggestion here so that you can handle enrollment. They thought that we should be advocating for allowing some parents to opt for remote learning and instead of homeschooling or other arrangements, and so that we could keep our enrollment steady while decreasing exposure. Are anybody working on a plan that would allow some parents to do remote and some kids not to do remote, or are you more leaning towards doing a hybrid for all students?
I fully agree with that comment, because I think there are going to be some students who simply are going to be at higher risk, those with respiratory compromise, immune systems. There's a lot of kids who are just going to be at higher risk, a lot of faculty, and educators that we have to think about. So I think we're going to need flexibility. And I would love to have more flexibility around our enrollment.
Anyone else want to say anything about that? Well,
Great
that's an
comment.
interesting
Great
concept that you said too, Christine. I mean, maybe there is a place for, teachers who can't be in the classroom because of their own health issues could be teaching from home to some of the students who can't come into classrooms because of their health conditions. Maybe there's a way to be very flexible. Y'all have all said this tonight many times, which is, how can we try to get through this next at least semester, the fall, and maybe into the spring with some flexibility.
And I think it addresses the issue of the public school. There's this false narrative that we try to have cookie cutter instruction, whereas the reality is public schools have children from every aspect of society and across the spectrums, and our teachers and our educators work so hard to meet the individual needs of each of those children. Each child every day is our focus. So that's, I think, how we're going to have to address this reopening and COVID as well, is that looking at individual needs of kids.
Terrence, do you have another question? I see one here about CARES Act.
I just have one more, and they just wanted to know, have you seen sort of the flip the class model or some sort of standardized pre-recorded curriculum or lesson that have worked, or do you think that, in your opinion, it's a valuable solution to reduce the stress on teachers?
I'll let you go, Justin.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any package sort of whole district solutions like that. I know I have seen a lot of individual teachers put together. Angie Scioli has done a lot of work in putting together civics videos, which is something I think she'd been doing before this whole thing happened. And so, I think there are a lot of people who are doing good work with that kind of thing, and it might be a matter of just trying to figure out, what solutions can be sort of brought to scale for what communities, and in terms of, kind of a short-term fix while we're dealing with this, because you're right, for every teacher to be trying to figure this all out on their own, I mean, it just really adds to the stress and the workload that everybody's dealing with right now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. It's just how do we get it to scale to fit so many people's needs? Because you can have, flipped classrooms, like he was saying, Angie Scioli does a really great job, but then you have this other teacher who has to learn this new skill, and then you have to think about, okay, well, some of my kids, have access to technology and they do really great, and their parents help them, and then you have some kids whose parents are not as adept. So it's all these different things and trying to make it fit to scale. Yeah.
Well, we have a couple more questions I'm going to ask them real quickly, and anybody jump in. I think we've kind of answered this. It said, one was, do you have an approximate date for when the State Department and the Senate will decide on the open schools based on the CDD guidelines? So parents and teachers really need to make plans. So I think they have, right? You agree with me that they've set August 17th for now, unless something changes, but the governor has something different, or right now it is August 17th, right?
Right. And we have some of our year-round schools are going earlier, but those are all on the website. The new calendars will be approved. We're going to approve them in June, and so we'll have those dates.
Okay, and then one of this is from, I think it's kind of for you, Christine. It's saying, didn't DPI allocate money from the CARES Act directly to Wake County?
Yeah, so Wake County is receiving directly from DPI funding from the CARES Act, yes.
Okay, and so
there's a lot of some restrictions on that funding, but it's very welcome funding to help us address some of the technology and staffing needs that we have because of the crisis.
Okay, and so one person was just saying kudos, they agreed with something that Justin said about it's not fair to ask, or Christina It's not fair to ask teachers and school staff to come into the school when you cannot deem it safe and clean and that they have the supplies they need when they get there. So they're really very, worried about that. And other folks are saying, where are our teacher assistants when we need them? Does anybody want to comment on that? They're saying that, if we ever needed our teacher assistants in the lower grades, we need them now because they could be helping with these things that have to go on in the classroom.
I agree.
Will you be
Totally.
able to use any of the CARES Act money, they're saying, to do any of that?
To hire additional staff. Well, I think that the difficulty with that, I mean, yes, we can, but I think the difficulty with that is it's one-time money. And I think it's, we need to be able to train and treat our employees with a long view in mind.
So I guess they're saying, so I guess you're saying you could, or you might, or you'd have, but it'd be contractual services and stuff. It wouldn't be a permanent full-time position. It might be something.
And
more
again,
money.
I don't know there might be restrictions on it that we're not able to do that. I mean,
Okay, so
that's in flux too.
Right, and so because we're getting into the end of our time and I want to give everybody a chance to wrap up, I do want to say to our guests, if we missed your question, I will look back through them afterwards, and if we missed your question, Terrence and I will get you an answer, and when we'll email you. We did that the other night. We had Mr. Fletcher here talking about Wake County Public Schools facilities. We had 5 or 6 questions we didn't get answered. Some because we missed them and some because we didn't know the answers. And so we did email everybody later, and we'll do the same thing tonight. But now I want to kind of give our guests a few minutes here to just in closing kind of share, their thoughts about some top things they think we got to do, or maybe just their advice to teachers and educators across the state and parents who are watching tonight. So I'll let anyone who wants go first and jump in, and then this will be our wrap-up question.
I'll tee it off. I think as a final thought kind of thing, I'll just say that, when this thing first started, I was honestly a little bit worried because I thought that it maybe was, just the chance that some of these big ed tech companies had been waiting for, and that this was going to be the beginning of, a push for, these teachers, we really don't need them anymore. We can have computer programs do everything that they were doing anyway. That's what I was worried about in the middle of March. I don't really think that anymore, based on the reaction that I've seen from parents alone who have been trying to, work from home and teach their kids at the same time, and just manage everything. I think our jobs are pretty safe. If we can weather this economic storm that we know is coming and make sure that we have the funding in place for the staff that we need for our schools, I think this crisis already has shown us how, like we've heard from a lot of you already tonight, how indispensable educators and our school staff are to our communities.
I would say 2 must-dos to reopen schools. One, we have to make sure that all our students and our staff are safe and they have what they need to make sure that they're safe and that they can thrive, that we're not having anyone get sick or hurt because of this virus. And also, we just have to think about equity. So I'm going with my colleague, Christina. Equity is so important. I really learned, I already knew it, but this pandemic really, really brought home to me the educational inequities that we have in our state, and realizing how much we have not been providing for our kids with what they need. And so we have to figure out a way, how are we going to do that as a community, as a state, as a country? And my advice, I think we just have to be kind with ourselves, because you know what? There are a lot of great questions that were asked tonight, but you know what? We're building the plane as it's flying. And so we just have to be kind with ourselves and be patient and understanding with one another. So yeah.
Yeah, that was really well said. I would say if we all agree that we will not go into unsafe and unhealthy schools, then we should organize around that and make sure whenever we return that they're safe and healthy. And I think the next thing is that our educators, our parents, and our students should be a part of whatever that organizing and planning process is, and they should absolutely be a part of the decision-making process for reopening schools. And I'll just echo Michele and say my advice is grace, humility, breathe, take a nap, you know, have Skype with your friends, like just take care of yourselves and your people in this moment.
Hear, hear. That's great advice, and I would double down on that, giving grace and generosity and forgiveness to each other, to yourself and to each other. But the two must-dos to reopen school, really, for the schools in our community, our system needs to be communicating and over-communicating with our students and our families to make sure that they're safe and that they feel excited and comfortable coming back to school, whatever form that takes. And I think the second must do is that our community needs to truly rally around our public schools, just as we've been talking of the exposing of that this virus and this crisis has exposed the weaknesses and the fragility of our school system, but it also has shown us the critical role that our public schools play in our community, how much they are needed, how much we already do on a shoestring, and just how much stronger we can be if we invest wisely and generously in our students and our kids.
Terrence, I want to give you a chance to have some closing comments. You've been hanging in there with me for a month on these conversations.
Not a problem. I will keep it short. I'll just answer one for each one. The to-dos, I would say, is to remember the Leandra report that would show us evidence that the joblessness, the hunger, the homelessness will continue even when the school reopens. And then the advice that I have would be for parents and for community to understand the values of the adults that are in those classrooms. And I appreciate Miles' teacher quite a bit at this moment because you understand what does it mean to hold that attention for that amount of time. And so just appreciate your teachers and remember the inequities that's outlined in the Leandra report.
Thank all of you for those comments. And Terrence, to your point, I have to tell you that my daughter said, "Do you think I can qualify for Teacher of the Year with one kid?" I went, "Nah, I don't." You know, she said, "You think I hope I'm getting Teacher of the Year?" I went, "Nah, I think you got to have more than one kid for 2 months, right?" So I think to all of your points that we are all recognizing the value of public education. And Christine, you said that. All of you have said it in a different way. I want to end by saying that, you know, our education is more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Our education is also those ways that we learn to get along and to interact and to think together and problem solve together and learn in a public school setting. We've known that for a very long time, that more than just learning to read or to do your multiplication is happening in a public schools. I want to bring your attention before, as we wrap up, my job is to wrap up here in a second. Invite you to go to our website, Public Schools First NC. We have a great fact sheet here about when school reopens. We've been listening to everybody and trying to cram everything in that fact sheet. We keep changing it every week, and we'll probably add a few more things after tonight. And really, we want to encourage you to look at it and share it as a way to start a conversation. Everyone who has participated in every single one of our webinars we've always had a comment in the chat box that says, don't forget to talk to teachers and parents. Don't forget to talk to, you know, the kids who are running the schools, and make sure they have some input into what we're doing. And so that's important. And the thing I have to talk about, because Terrence and I have dedicated our life and for the last couple years dealing with the issue of adverse childhood experiences. and caring very much about the trauma that's in our homes and in our families and our society against children. And so, and we've been showing the film Resilience and leading workshops for years now. And one of the things that we know, and on this website, we have lots of resources for y'all. And there's a special page on COVID, and we encourage you to go and look at that, because we really know that if already we had 25% of our kids had 2 or more ACEs, and had at least 2 ACEs, what do we think we're going to face in August when our kids come back? So I think it's really important for us as parents and educators, grandparents, community members, legislators, county commissioners, school boards, for us to go and spend some time on this page to really understand the impact of trauma on our children and on their families, because we're going to have to start school again, and we do pray for that. And we're going to have to be stronger and smarter and more capable of doing it. What we don't want to see is what we've all been fighting against, most of us, our adult professional life, which is unequal education. Because we don't want just the kids who have to ride the bus to come back to school because they have ride the bus because they have no other transportation. We don't want just the kids to come to school that can ride in a car because they don't have to ride a bus. We don't want just some children to have a public education in the fall. We want to figure out a way, and I'm so excited because you guys can do it, that every child has an opportunity to be educated and come back to a public school setting, whether it's through remote or at school. So I want to say to you guys, please stay connected with us, like our, you know, the stuff, right? Like our page, tweet, follow, sign your life away to our newsletter. But please try to stay connected to us because we will try to keep you informed. Our last call to action, we'd like to hope that people listening will do, is please contact your General Assembly members, contact your local county commissioners, contact your school board, share with them your concerns, your support, and advocate that we can have the things that we need to make sure that every child, regardless of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their income, their zip code, can come back to school in August and have a high quality public education. Thank you all for participating in this conversation. I adore all of you individually and collectively. You're awesome. And I hope that we will have this conversation again. Maybe in another 5 or 6 weeks, we'll have more understanding of the landscape. And maybe we can come back together and talk about now what. Would y'all do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we'll see what happens when the General Assembly leaves town. I'm going to call you back up and get you on this meeting. So good night to our guests and good night to all of you
Good
tonight.
night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
See y'all later.
See ya. Thank you all.